Hello, everyone. Today is Friday, October 9th. As always, I'm your host for Collectibles and Coffee, Edward Nguyen. Today, beverage of choice is water, nothing too interesting, just clean, healthy living. Today, um, we'll be talking about the EDH market, Elder Dragon Highlander, Elder Dragon Highlander slash Commander in some capacity. It really has permeated into Magic for being something that was a little bit more narrow and kind of a smaller subset of Magic, as it were, into really ballooning up and becoming its own format, building its own community, having its own following of players. Uh, for a long time, it was one of those things that I know in my experience, I really just didn't really think much about it. I just kind of put it as an afterthought. Things were a little bit different for me at the time because I was more focused at the time, kind of earlier. We're talking at least 5+ years ago. I was more focused on competitive Magic. So the formats that were important to me were the more competitive ones: standard, modern, legacy, what have you. And to be perfectly honest, I had kind of shunned Commander. I had kind of shunned EDH players in the sense that I, to be perfectly honest, I viewed it as being casual. I didn't really think too much about it. I really saw Magic at the time as being a good competitive outlet for myself, and that kind of clouded my judgment. That kind of affected how I saw what EDH could do to the market. So today we'll kind of review all that. For those of you who may not be as familiar, I'll give kind of a brief breakdown on EDH just to give us some perspective, give us some background as to what has really brought it to being as big, as successful as it is today, and why it has really changed the whole game of Magic so dramatically. So with that, we'll just kind of jump right in. Commander at its core, it had started out as EDH. This is a throwback to EDH, rather, is short for Elder Dragon Highlander. If we break this down, Elder Dragon refers to the original Legends. Dragons are, I think, among the first legendary creatures that they had printed. This is a throwback to them. And the word Highlander is simply a format where only one of each card is legal. You can't play more than one of any card in your deck, with the exception of basic lands. So when you combine these together, you have Elder Dragons, right, Legends, and Highlander. You can only play one of each card. So the rules of EDH itself are pretty straightforward. You are forced to play a 99 card deck, no more, no less, and 99 cards, and your 100th card will be something known as your general. It's kind of evolved over time. Now people more frequently know as your commander. Your commander really dictates how you build your deck. The reason for this is the colors of your commander dictate the color identity of your deck, and you are only allowed to play cards that have the colors that share a color identity with your commander in your deck. So if you're playing a mono red commander, it has to be red. Rather, if you're going to play mono red commander, your commander is red. It has to be a legendary creature. In this case, if it's red, your deck can only contain red cards. You can't play hybrid cards. So if a card is a red-white hybrid card, you can't play that. Even though it is red, it can only be red. It has to be mono red. You can't play anything that would produce mana outside of your colors. So a Boros Guildgate, for example, it's Sacred Foundry, Arid Mesa, because these reference cards that fall outside of your color identity, outside of mono red, these are no-goes. Even though they do produce red mana themselves indirectly, or they fetch up mountains in the case of Arid Mesa. Those are no-goes, so your deck would basically mountains, colorless cards, and red cards. That's what your deck would contain for your 99 card Highlander deck, EDH deck. So as such, a lot of people, if you want to play with more colors, right, you simply pick a multicolored general. If you have a Simic general, a blue-green general, like I can't think of one off the top of my head. There's just so many out there. If you pick a Simic general, right, you can play blue cards, you can play green cards, you can play blue-green cards, you can play blue-green hybrid cards. Now you can start playing things like Misty Rainforest, Tropical Island, etc. When you play 3 colors, we take this a step further, right? If you play Bant General, Rafik of the Many, right? You can play green cards, blue cards, green white cards, blue white cards, blue green cards, 3 color cards that contain those, and you can play the full spectrum of lands, any combination thereof. And you can see how it scales. If you play 5 color general, right, you realistically can play any card that you want inside your deck. So the rules have evolved over time. There is a rules committee. They are responsible for basically maintaining, one, the spirit and the philosophy of the format. If you go on their website, mtgcommander.net, this is really kind of the official website for MTG, for a Commander, what have you. It contains a lot of news, rules updates, ban restricted announcements. They all go here. You have a lot of members of the community, the rules committee, which we'll get to in a moment. They all kind of reside here. They post here. And this is really kind of your go-to to understand kind of get the pulse on the Commander format, as it were. So one thing's at the top. One of the tabs at the top that you can click on is format philosophy, and understanding the format philosophy is really kind of what has guided Commander and EDH since the beginning. Understanding how it works is integral to being able to understand the type of customer that an EDH player is. There's a lot of people out there. It's no different than any other format of Magic, right? You have standard players who are primarily probably focused on standard. You probably have the more competitive type, right? That player is also likely to play modern, Pioneer, really, right, kind of the cutting edge, as it were. They're always wanting the new decks, new cards for standard, for new formats that are relevant, right? You have legacy players, kind of people who are much more entrenched. They've played Magic for a long time. Their collections are a little bit bigger. They're probably a little bit older. Again, just the nature of having played Magic for a long time. Then, of course, you have Commander players. Really no different. Their idea, they want to build things that are cool, for their EDH deck, and buying them, understanding their buying habits, understanding how you can appeal to them is really integral to being able to build that community. And understanding the format philosophy really goes a long way towards understanding that. I'm not going to read the entire thing here, but just clicking on it, the philosophy of Commander, and I quote, this is in bold, the very first words: Commander is for fun. It is a socially interactive multiplayer Magic the Gathering format full of wild interactions and epic plays, specifically designed as an alternative to tournament Magic. As is fitting for a format in which you choose an avatar to lead your forces into battle, Commander focuses on a resonant experience. Each game is a journey the players share, relying on a social contract in which each player is considerate of the experiences of everyone involved. This promotes player interaction, intergame variance, a variety of playstyles, and a positive communal atmosphere. At the end of an ideal Commander game, someone will have won, but all participants will have had the opportunity to express themselves through their deck building and game play. So again, this is something that is integral to the format. The people who had designed the format, the rules committee, they are very, very strong believers in this. This really does guide how the rules of EDH play out. The ban list is maintained for this reason. Some of the things that they had bolded: Commanders for fun, resonant experience, and social contract. So what this really means is that, unlike tournament Magic, a lot of things that are considered to be more acceptable in tournament Magic, right? Net decking, playing the best cards, right? Doing what you can to kind of get an edge over your opponent. Side issue entirely, not going to really get into ethics of that. A lot of these, because there is no real enforcement inside Commander, a lot of these rules really come down to play group to play group. It really comes down to community that you're trying to build. If you're a store, you may know this, having a good sense of what your Commander players like, what their interests are, how competitive they are, how not competitive they are, really goes a long way to being able to, one, grow that committee, and being able to maximize potentially how you can appeal to them, and being able to really build your market in the sense that is geared towards them, makes them feel welcome, and is going to be profitable for you. Again, because it is a social contract, there's nothing that really dictates, hey, you can't do this or you can do this. There are definitely people out there. You have, on one end of the spectrum, you have very, very competitive Commander players who like to be able to basically assemble their combo as quickly as possible and win in a relatively dramatic form. That's perfectly fine. On the other end, you have much more casual players. They want games to go longer. They want to be ramping up. They want to be playing, in not so eloquent words, big dumb creatures that they can spend a lot of mana on, that do big, cool, flashy things, not necessarily always focus on winning or just beating their opponents, but being able to do cool things. That's what they kind of allude to when they say all participants will have had the opportunity to express themselves through their deck building and gameplay. You have a lot of people who build their deck and they simply like the aesthetics of it. Some people like to be able to collect, to be able to get cards for their deck, to be able to find the cool foils they like. That's really the beauty of Commander. I think, again, this is why Commander has done so well. And it's one of those things that has really permeated into all of Magic. It's really changed the face of Magic. We'll get back to that in a bit. But really understanding Commander is really about understanding the philosophy of the format and how it's designed, who it's designed towards, and being able to maximize your understanding of that. So the Rules Committee, to my understanding, the Rules Committee is a relatively small group of people. The Rules Committee itself is only made up of 4 people. I believe Scott Larrabee and Sheldon Menery and Toby Elliott are on them. I believe there's someone else. I'm not completely sure. I'm not a Commander player myself. I'm just aware of it, to be perfectly honest. And these are people, most of them, they've been longtime judges. You generally have a lot of judges who like EDH just because you create a lot of really interesting rules interactions. You have very, very deep stacks in terms of spells and abilities being used. And it really creates a very unique and interesting format that you don't really see much in more competitive / tournament play, just because they just aren't prevalent, they aren't there. The Rules Committee is really designed to enforce the format in the sense that they want to keep things as close to the spirit and the philosophy of the format as possible. They do manage the banned and restricted lists. I believe that they have a small committee of people who advise them or that they have discussions with. I believe it's a slightly bigger group of people. This is something that's just come down through social media. Again, I'm not completely sure on that. Don't hold me to that. But the idea of the banned list, rather, is no restricted cards because everything is restricted. The banned list is designed with cards in mind that are that would, in some sense, violate the spirit of Commander. And a lot of these cards, they do things that are monstrously powerful. So there are definitely cards that are definitively too powerful in EDH. No different than why we ban cards in Standard, we ban cards in Modern, Legacy, etc. A lot of these cards do things, even though most of them, some of them cost a lot of mana, they may interact with the game in a very negative way. One of the cards on here, Biorhythm. This is an 8 mana sorcery, 6 and 2 green. Each player's life total becomes the number of creatures he or she controls. The way this works natively with the game is if someone plays a deck that has very few creatures, that doesn't really rely on creatures to win, right, this spell would just kill them outright. Or following a Wrath, or if someone plays Wrath and you play a creature, and you play this, right, not many people are going to have creatures, you could very easily be killing off multiple people with this spell. Emrakul, the Aeon's Torn, right, everyone's favorite Eldrazi, right, 15/15, it can't be countered, even if you play. It's basically a time walk. It's an annihilator ability, less significant. But basically playing this creature, it really pushes everyone to be playing this. It is a colorless creature. It goes in every deck. And gaining 15 mana, even though you would never see this in typical tournament play, gaining 15 mana in EDH is really not that big of a deal, especially when you're talking about 100 card decks. You're playing more lands than normal. Most decks play anywhere from 33 to probably about 38 to 40 lands. You have a lot of ramp spells. You have a lot of things that generate mana. Soul Ring is basically a card that is completely evergreen EDH. Every deck plays it. So these cards really make it easy to play out Emrakul, and Emrakul just basically kind of is not a particularly fun card to play against. That's really the guideline. If you think about how a card works, if you would ever be in a situation where this is really not fun to play against that card, that probably explains why it's banned. You have cards that interact somewhat negatively with Legends cards. So Karakas is banned, right? This is the Legends land. Tap to add white mana to your mana pool, and then tap return target legend to their owner's hand. Right, not particularly fun card, especially when it's designed around playing your commander, right? Playing your legendary creature, that's your general. Playing that card, usually integral. Some decks, it's more integral than others. There are decks where the commander is only there as a placeholder. The commander is played so that the deck itself has access to the colors of mana required. Whereas some decks, you have the entire theme of the deck is really centered around the general. Playing the general is really integral to making the deck work. And Crack is kind of a violation of that, right? Against the Spirit, it's one card, it's a little bit too easy to play, and it can basically just shut someone out of the game entirely. And then we have cards that are prohibitively expensive. So the Power 9 is all in there. Just as kind of just to kind of bounce edge. That way EDH becomes less about who has more money in the format. That is something that has changed a little bit over time. The market has changed in a way where EDH decks are becoming more and more expensive as cards get more expensive. But for the most part, those cards kind of fall in that category of these are too expensive. So we have the Power 9. Time Vault is also on there. Anti-cards removed as well, just kind of a generic, like those anti-cards really shouldn't exist in Magic, but they were made in a very different era of Magic being printed. So that's the rules committee. That's the ban list. That's kind of the rules. That's kind of the breakdown, the background of EDH. So we understand a bit more about EDH. We understand kind of what guides it, how it operates, how it ticks, as it were, kind of the pulse, the soul of EDH. Now that we have a good idea on that, we can kind of start to look at the market. We can understand how it's changed over time and what we can do to maximize our gains through EDH. So EDH has caught on for quite some time. The first Commander product, it came out in 2011. These were a series of decks. These are 3-color decks. There's a series of 5 of them for each of the 3-color enemy shards that are in there. This was Wizards' real first experiment with Commander. Commander had existed before that. It was known as EDH. It had existed for a few years before that. It's because it's a community grown grassroots format. It was kind of built from ground up. 2011, this series of decks, this was kind of their first experiment into it. 2012, they released Commander's Arsenal. It was kind of a big boxy product. It had the rotational life counter that people like to use. Your life total starts at 40. Your general, there's an interaction with general damage, commander damage. These are types of things that do exist. So people would like to do things like have these cool dice counters that they sell well. They're kind of bulky. You may have seen them in your store. Commander's Arsenal, kind of a premier product in there. For the longest time, this was actually one of the only way for quite some time actually to get a card like Foil Sylvan Library, because there's a full Sylvan Library inside. Prior to this, you have to remember that in 2012, when Commander's Arsenal came out, there was no Eternal Masters yet, so there's actually no Foil Sylvan Library. Prior to this, this was the only way to get it for quite some time. So that was Commander's Arsenal. It was kind of their premium product, as it were. And then 2013, 2014, 2015, now we're at the time when every year they're starting to release a set of Commander decks. They've gone through different iterations. In 2014, they had monocolor decks, but they had Planeswalkers. That was an option for Commander. They've done things. One year it was about tribes. So there was a dragon deck, a vampire deck. a cat deck. I can't remember what the other deck was. So they've really gone through different iterations of commander type decks over the years. This has been a pretty big source of speculation. A lot of people have done well. I remember when the dragon deck was spoiled, the vampire deck was spoiled, right? As you can imagine, this caused dragon cards to start spiking, cat cards to start spiking, vampire cards to start spiking, because people were trying to get ahead of these cards that may not be in the deck. Because as someone who worked in retail at the time, when people were buying these decks, the first thing that people do, especially if they're trying to dip their feet into the format, is they buy a deck. Let's say we're going to buy the Vampires deck. This is a Mardu deck, right? White, black, and red. They want to buy this deck. First thing they're going to do is, how can I make this deck better? What cards can I buy to make this deck better? And their inclination is they're likely going to buy vampires. They have to buy white, black, and red vampires, and probably white, black, and red cards as well. And they're going to start tuning their deck. So usually, the beauty of this is this one transaction is not going to be the only transaction your customer makes. That customer is going to come back. They're probably going to play a few games with the deck, see how the deck plays out, especially if they're playing at home, right? Maybe they bought 2 decks for themselves and their partner, significant other, right? Maybe 2 of them are playing and they battle against each other to play a few times, and then they want to now swap out some cards in the deck. Maybe this card doesn't work well. Maybe this card isn't very powerful. What can I do to start upgrading my deck? That customer comes back, and now they're buying white, black, and red cards, white, black, and red vampires, what have you, to start upgrading their deck. They do so for their partner, and you can see how this kind of creates this cycle of wanting to continuously recycle cards in their deck to make it better, bigger, flashier, etc. A lot of people take this one step further, right? Now you not only are you trying to sell cards for that deck, if your customer wants them, now some people take that step further. Now that they decide that this vampire deck is the one that they really like, now people start to foil it. And that is a big part of EDH. That is, again, a big money maker. Foils do very, very well among the commander community. People like foils, again, because it, as indicated by format philosophy, this is a way for people to express themselves through their deck, how they build their deck. Buying foils, something that's big, that's flashy, that's really a core component of EDH. A lot of people I know have really, really nice commander decks. They take a lot of pride, they put a lot of energy, they put a lot of effort into foiling it, into getting it foiled in a certain language. Some people really like Japanese cards. That's my experience. Being able to have that level of customization, being able to build that identity into your deck is a big part of why EDH, I think, has survived as long as it has, and that's really why EDH is so lucrative. But revisiting some of the sets, right, we have basically seen commander decks being released every year in some capacity. Now this year, 2020, we've talked about this a few times on the show, Wizards actually taking a step further. Now we have Commander Legends, which is a set that's going to be released, coming out in November. It's going to be released, and it's actually, now you basically have Commander in booster pack form, and now it's designed to be drafted to be able to play with friends, really kind of have a limited meets Commander experience for a group of people. So that's something that's coming out, right? This is something that they haven't done before. Most commander type products are released. They are either released in commander decks, and sometimes we see a lot of bleed overs, as it were. So they'll design standard decks or standard sets now, Zendikar Rising, Core 2021, Ikoria, what have you, and they'll basically have cards in the set that are definitively geared towards commander. This isn't something that they say, but it's very clear that you can see this. Usually this is done kind of a big flashy creature that has an over-the-top ability. It has a unique ability. That really is what guides what commander cards look like. And for the first time ever, now they have a draft set, release set that is going to be designed around commander only. So that's really taking a step further, and now they're also pushing the Commander Collection Green. We can only assume that, over a period of time, we'll see Commander Collection Red, Commander Collection Black, Commander Collection White, etc., right? The full cycle of colors. This is something that we've talked about as well. It'll be released, I want to say, the beginning of December. Right, so it's basically a series of cards. Some of these cards do need reprints, but mostly this is a way for them to sell singles. The secondary market on these cards are generally all pretty high. There's a lot of kind of in-demand cards. Worldly Tutor is one of them. That card hasn't seen a reprint since 6th edition. The original printing was a Mirage. The only other printing is 6th edition. So now you can get a full Worldly Tutor. Sylvan Library is in there. Sylvan Library is kind of your evergreen, funny enough, evergreen green card, right? It really fits into most decks. It's a way to draw extra cards. There are more foil options now than there were before because we do have the Turtle Masters version, and now you with the Commander Collection Green Premium version, you can get a foil Sylvan Library in there as well. So this is kind of a different way. This is really Wizards acknowledging that Commander is a big part of what they do. They know that sells well. They know that they have a large following for Commander players. And I've seen this before. I've seen this in retail. Commander, large following of people. They're not always going to be the one that are in your store week in and week out, right? Usually we see kind of more tournament type players, more competitive type players who are in frequently to be drafting, to be playing standard, to be playing modern, etc. But your Commander players are the ones that are likely placing large orders. They'll be buying cards constantly. We definitely had no shortage of Commander players that would buy a lot of singles from us constantly all the time to be able to constantly upgrade their deck. They were buying a lot of sealed product and just taking it home and enjoying it and being able to open up the product and figure out what new cards can go into their deck. So it was really, it's really very wide open in terms of the type of Commander players that you can appeal to and how you can basically adjust your community in such a way that is accommodating to them, and it really makes them, one, by making them feel welcome, you're more inclined to have these types of players return to your store and buy from you. Again, these Commander players, because they're not as competitive as it were. I know a lot of them, they chose to not go out and buy online. They chose to not buy through TCG Player, Star City Games, Card Kingdom, what have you, unless they were actually required to, unless we didn't have something in stock. They would always come to us first, and they would always seek us out because, one, they wanted to support the store, and two, because we treated them right, because we helped build that community. Eventually, at some point, we did start having a F&M Commander night on Friday, and we developed a huge following for that. A lot of these people, they would just constantly be buying from us, and it was basically a very, very steady source of a player that we could consistently count on to basically be spending X amount per week, per month, per set cycle, etc. Right, and then now that these products are starting to come out more, Commander Legends, Commander Green, right, it really goes to show how big of a market there is for Wizards to basically be designing an entire set, be designing this premium product, right, the Commander Collection Green, around these players. And interestingly enough, if you go back and look at some of these sealed products, right, if you go back to 2011 and look at the sealed products, the sealed boxes themselves are actually pretty valuable. There is kind of a cap on how expensive they can be. They have released some products. They've actually released 2 Commander Anthology sets, Commander Anthologies 1, Commander Anthologies 2, and as the name suggests, they actually reprinted some of these old sets inside these Commander Anthology decks. I believe for Commander Anthology 1, it had Heavenly Inferno. That's from 2011. That's the most expensive one. That's the one with Kalia, an angel in there. So that they had released that. There was one deck from 2011, that one 2013, 14, and 15. I want to say those 4 decks are inside of that. One from each year. But even so, even though the cards have been reprinted, even though the decks themselves have been basically reprinted in its entirety, the sealed decks from 2011, 2013 are still worth actually a lot of money. Even though if you want to buy those cards individually, it's much, much lower. If I actually log on to Dawnglare here and I take a look, and Commander, in the first year, it was just referred to as Commander, the first set. The 5 decks, Heavenly Inferno, is only $60.94 in terms of value. This is approximately what it would cost me to buy each of those cards inside the deck from TCG Player. Right, and that really is kind of reflective of the entire set. Counterpunch, Devour for Power, Heavenly Inferno, Mirror Mastery, Political Puppets. The lowest one, you have one at $50 and one at $52, two of them at $60, and one of them at $66. If you look on TCG Player, trying to buy a Heavenly Inferno deck, if I had to type it in right now, if I want to buy the sealed deck, the price, there's 4 copies on TCG Player. One is in Spanish, one is in Italian, and then there's 2 English ones. One is at $230.09, and the other one is at $419.99. So not a lot of options. The sealed value much higher than the pieces itself. And this isn't just restricted to the 2011 run, right? You may think that, 2011, this was the first set, there's probably not a lot of supply. Magic was much more constricted back then. That's a very fair and valid point. A lot of people say this. We may not see a lot of these 2011 decks come through that often because they are so rare, right? But we don't need to go back that far. If we go back and look at 2017, this was the year when they did the cycle of Tribal that we talked about. The Dragon deck, Draconic Domination. Dragon's always a big, kind of big archetype, right? People always like, as a general rule in Magic, we know that dragons will sell well, angels will sell well, these kind of big marquee archetypes that really have been present all through Magic. So that was the year they did Tribal, Draconic Domination. It's a 5-color dragon deck. MTG Dawnglare, it puts the value on the deck, the contents of the deck, $102.57. The sealed deck, the cheapest copy I can find on TCG Player right now, is, for English, $188.88. And this is 2017. That was only 3 years ago. This is well into the time when people know that Commander will do well. Commander is a big deal. That people like to collect these things sealed. People still buy the sealed products, even though, again, if they just want to play the deck, they can buy the pieces individually and spend and save themselves $80+. Some of the more recent decks haven't really had time to mature yet. Excuse me. Commander 2018, for example, if we look the most valuable deck, Exquisite Invention. Dawnglare puts the estimated value on the deck at $40.60. If we pull it up on TCG Player, trying to buy a sealed deck, Exquisite Invention. Right, this is available for not that much higher than what retail was. MSRP, I think, was $39.99 on this. You can basically buy it for $46.88, $39.99 plus $7 shipping. There's a seller on there, $38.99 plus $99. They have 21 copies, right? So these are still pretty available. We're probably 2018 onward. We're probably at the point when, one, it's a little bit too new to really get expensive, and two, there's probably just so much more of it printed out there that the value probably hasn't ballooned the way that some of the older sets have. So that's just kind of a brief history on sealed product. We know that a lot of these decks, they do have value if you find an opportunity to pick them up on the cheap. I know some of my colleagues, some of my friends, they've had success just walking into old mom and pop shops, game stores that don't really deal heavily in Magic, and they'll sometimes randomly just find these old Commander sealed products on the shelves. Obviously, that's becoming harder and harder. More people are becoming more savvy to this, but sometimes you just find these on the shelf for the same sticker tag they had when they first came out years and years ago. And a lot of these, some people, they randomly get that lucky hit, and they can do well with sealed product. Kind of moving away from sealed product itself, we can look at singles. EDH, like I mentioned a few times, it has really kind of changed the face of Magic the Gathering. I think, again, Wizards have become much more savvy. They know that there is a huge consumer base for Commander-centric products. We've mentioned it has really changed their design philosophy. They really integrate Commander-centric cards into every set. There may not be a lot, but it's really there. You can definitely tell that these cards were designed with Commander in mind. Right? I think like one of the most, well, not one, but two of the most prevalent cards in Zendikar Rising, among the most expensive, they're mythics. So they'll always hold their value, and because of their, if I pull them up here, pull their prices up, because of their design, because how they work, they're always going to be popular in Commander. And those would be Forsaken Monument, right? This is the 5-mana artifact. Colorless creatures you control get +2/+2. Whenever you tap a permanent for colorless, add an additional colorless. And whenever you cast a colorless spell, you gain 2 life. Legendary artifact, right, does big things for people that play Eldrazi-centric Commander decks. And then you also have Lithoform Engine, legendary artifact, 4 mana, 2 tap, copy target activated or triggered ability you control. You may choose new targets for its copy. 3 basically lets you fork an instant or sorcery, and then 4 basically copy target permanent spell you control. Right, all those abilities, again, really designed towards Commander. A little too slow, a little too clunky for competitive play, but these cards, I think these are exemplary cards for what Commander is, what Commander does. They really embrace kind of the philosophy of Commander, doing big, flashy, cool things, right? Forking your spell, forking a triggered ability, being able to copy a permanent spell, etc. Right? That really embraces what Commander does and what it aspires to, and they know that. A lot of stores, a lot of people have really warmed up to the fact that these are Commander-centric cards, that they will do well with, EDH crowd, and that really is what is selling people on packs. A lot of these prices are propped up, again, because of the Commander community, because of how good they are in that format. And again, that's a nod to a change in design philosophy. We've seen it happen more and more over the years. We have more creatures. Right, the nature of Commander is, in order for a creature to be your Commander, it has to be legendary. So we do see more and more legendary creatures that have popped up, that have become just kind of very popular Commanders, and that really opens up the market. Whenever we see this, whenever we see a Commander cool ability, it usually causes cards to jump up in price. We'll take a look at some of the data in a bit that suggests this, right? But usually these cards that pop up in price are usually people who are seeing a card being spoiled. They think that, oh man, this would be a great new Commander, and they start buying up cards that work well with this Commander. And that really causes cards to jump up in price. And that really is what, that's a big part of why the market has changed so dramatically, because cards aren't just, it's not just about competitive cards anymore. I would say back in kind of like the 2011, 12, 13 era, when modern cards were going crazy, right? Most of the spikes that happened would be related directly to competitive play. Right, if a deck was doing particularly well, components of that card of that deck would start going up in price. In the meanwhile, Commander cards had slowly and quietly crept up in price, but we didn't really see any of the dramatic jumps that we saw before. Talked about how, again, now we have sets that are being designed around Commander. I don't suspect that Commander Legends will be a one and done set. I imagine that if it's something that does well, if it sells well for Wizards, you can bet for sure that they'll be, right back to the whiteboard trying to figure out ways to get more out of Commander, get more out of Commander Legends, and being able to really milk that and get the most they can out of it. Using MTG Stocks, again, when we talked about prices and how they change dramatically, yesterday we kind of talked about looking at data. I talked about how using MTG Stocks is kind of a cornerstone to looking at price changes. You have to take it with a grain of salt. You have to be careful about putting too much weight into the data. But if I just pull it up right now and I look at interests, kind of the top price changers, some of the biggest changes. If I go through and I look, most cards nowadays that are changing dramatically kind of either realistically fall into either reserveless cards in short supply, likely to go up, and then Commander cards. There are some cards that kind of are some outliers, but that don't really fall into any specific category. But some of these, for example, If I just kind of scroll down from the top, um, Bogart Shenanigans, probably short supply. Void Mage Apprentice, it's a wizard. Probably some people getting out ahead. One of the sets that release next year is going to be very wizard centric. So people may be starting to buy wizards now, trying to get ahead and buy wizards if they had a commander deck in mind, for example, buying them now, or possibly this card could be reprinted. Who knows? A lot of these cards, the most likely attribute is they're simply in short supply, and then this is just indicative of them going up. In the Eye of Chaos, Legends card, reserve list, no surprise there that went up. Escape to the Wilds, extended art, so Throne of Eldraine, this is an extended art card, probably short supply. Johnny the Greathearted, promo pack version, short supply. Trade Routes, commander card, Bone Dancer, reserve lists. The next few cards, reserve lists. Lord of Extinction, just textbook commander card. Whereas elemental, 5 mana, power toughness equal number of cards in all graveyards. Usually when you see kind of effects that change based on the number of players in the game, usually very, very good commander card. Blasphemous Act, kind of one, deals 13 damage to creatures. It costs less for each creature on the battlefield, right? 13 damage to all creatures is kind of a good board wipe. Usually with enough people in the game, you can get it down to very, very cheap. Again, that's an example of a commander card. This Lord of Extinction counts cards in all graveyards. In all graveyards, not just your own, not just one opponent. Right, but if you're playing a 4-player game, right, Lord of Extinction, pretty big creature pretty quickly. Cloud Key, definitively an EDH card. Mirror Gallery, EDH card. Wrath of God, Revised Edition, right, not collector value here. We're not seeing like a big price in beta or alpha, but Revised Edition, right, just kind of your just go-to white border one. Definitely an EDH card. Right, so the list goes on. We can definitely see how a lot of these cards not necessarily spiking, right? Most of these numbers don't suggest substantial growth. It's more indicative of card supply is slowly dwindling over time. EDH players are kind of like black holes. When you sell them cards, they generally keep them forever. I know a lot of EDH players that have a ton of decks. There are people that have 20, 30, 40, 50 decks, and they just keep building them because they just like, whenever there's a new legend comes out and they just find more cards that can fit in, they'll just keep adding cards to their collection. They'll just keep building decks, and there's no real reason for them to take a deck apart, because why take a deck apart when you can just build a different commander? Unless you have a commander that is going to somehow absorb that first commander, right? You have no real reason to take that deck apart. So these cards, when they are being slowly dwindled in supply over time, you don't really see more copies just being introduced in the market again. So usually the rate at which they get bought up is much higher than the rate at which stores are able to restock and reintroduce them to the market. So that's kind of MTG Stocks. Again, it's worth taking a quick glance. You can kind of see what's trending. I do suspect that when we get closer to, for example, the set being released next year that's related to Wizards, the name escapes me at the moment, right? Once cards start getting spoiled, we'll start seeing Wizards cards going up in price. They'll show up on the interest list more and more. People will be buying Wizards once people figure out this legendary Wizards is a deck I want to build around. Now I need to buy cards that have a Wizard subtype that support that commander. We've seen Command Fest pop up. This was something that started to pick up at the end of last year. Command Fests are something that are prevalent at every Magic Fest now. So Command Fests, they had Command Fest. There were a few. I attended one Command Fest, but there were a few others that I didn't attend. They're basically just a large gathering, a festival, as it were, for Commander players. And there's not really scheduled events in the sense that you need to show up at specific times to play your event. It's really just a bunch of tables set up. You have to buy pass to get in. And basically, you get a certain number of tickets. You can play in events that do gear you towards prizes. But for the most part, again, it's just a lot of people, just 4-player tables that allow 4 people to sit down and just start playing with each other. They manage to section off different parts, not section off, but they have tables that are designated for more competitive players, for more casual players. I believe they had introduced a scale kind of based on how competitive you are as an EDH player. It kind of allows you to find people that fit what you are wanting. So it's very cool. And you can see that this is really them embracing how successful Commander is, why it makes sense to try and bring people into the format, to introduce people to the format. and get these people who may not otherwise want to be attending a Magic Fest because realistically they're not there, they're just not competitive players. But by having this option there for them, you can now introduce a new group of people who may not otherwise be coming to your event. So that's Command Fest. Because it is a community-based format, because so much about it is the community, about the types of personalities, the people who are playing. There's a lot of content creators who have really picked up EDH and taken off with it. You have people that, there's plenty of podcasts, there's plenty of streamers. There's a lot of people that will just play EDH on stream, do deck techs, right? Introduce new decks that they build, because the format is so open, right? There's so many Legends cards, there's so many Commanders cards out there that it really, again, gives you the opportunity to be able to express yourself, to be able to play whatever deck you want in whatever style you want and make it work for you. And the interesting thing about a lot of these content creators is they have a very, very powerful effect on the market itself, because usually when these people start coming out with decks, especially if they start identifying that, hey man, this card is pretty powerful, but no one's really caught on yet. And then all of a sudden, once they have a video for it, once they have a deck tech or whatever, they're playing with this card, they're showcasing how good this card is. All of a sudden you start having people that follow them wanting to go out and buy those cards themselves. And this basically, again, creates a huge surge in demand for this card. And usually we've definitely seen the interest on MTG stock reflect this. This is usually people wanting to buy these cards to play with. And usually that causes a huge surge in the price, because a lot of these cards, some of them may be obscure, supply isn't quite as high as we've seen in the past. And usually that is kind of a big driver. So these content creators are worth keeping an eye on, because some of them, the ones who have good ideas, they do have a very, very powerful effect on the marketplace, like we mentioned. And really, I think to kind of summarize all this and looking at this from Wizards' perspective, from Wizards of the Coast perspective, they have an understanding of how a Commander player works. They understand the type of person that Commander player is. It would behoove you, if you own a store, if you own a business, if you sell cards, to understand who those Commander players are, the people, the customers who are Commander players who buy from you. Building a strong relationship with them will be a profitable venture for you in the long run. Again, because it's community based, because there's a lot of people who are in it, because you have most Commander players, they obviously, because it's community based, they just don't have it for themselves and a few other people. They usually have a group of friends. I know I have no shortage of friends, customers who have EDH groups that get together, probably prior to the pandemic, probably less so now. But even now, with the advent of technology, we have people who participate in EDH games remotely. People do so via webcam. You all join a stream, and you can basically play EDH together remotely. Groups that did get together before, it would just be a weekly occurrence, right? It'd just be a Friday night, go out, hang out at someone's house, have some food, and play the EDH together for the whole evening. Being able to understand that type of person, being able to understand that type of customer, is really going to do very, very well for your business in the long run, if you're able to being able to satisfy their needs and being able to get what they want in terms of progs, in terms of singles, and having them available will be beneficial for you. So to go into some more details, some of the resources I use, EDH Rec. This is a website. I believe Card Kingdom is tied to this site in some capacity, because Card Kingdom's prices are displayed. One of the tools I use, this is another source of data. You can go out there and take a look at this. One, there's a lot of content creators on here. There's a lot of people who write articles, who talk about different decks, cards, whatever. The tools I use, you go towards the top. If you pull down the tab about cards, and you type and you click on top cards, it has top 100 cards and adds base. I use this when picking bulk. There's a lot of cards on here that may be well known to people, but a lot of these cards, even though they're not worth a lot, will always sell well because of how popular they are in Commander. Top card, Soul Ring. Majority of EDH decks, everyone knows to pull Soul Ring. Second card, Swords of Plowshares. It's gone through a lot of reprints, but you still find this in bulk occasionally. It's worth a few dollars. They sell very, very quickly. They sell very well. You should always be pulling this card. Arcane Signet, it's kind of cooled because there's been more reprints, there's been more ways to acquire this card. Cultivate, this is an example of a card that you can find in bulk. It's not worth a lot of money, but it will always sell well. Not almost, but a fair amount of green decks that play them do play Cultivate. It's very easy to flip this card. If you pick this out of bulk, it's worth your effort. Once you have a bunch of them, just list them all at once, and you will sell. And these cards, once you know enough of these cards, it does add up to a considerable amount of cards when you're going through bulk. Counterspell is another example. Again, there's been so many reprints and iterations of Counterspell. The Counterspell does still do well, even your random 5th edition white border copy, what have you. Counterspells will always sell. But looking through here, you can definitely get a good idea of cards that will always sell. Cyclonic Rift, probably one of the best blue cards out there. You have no problem selling that card. Usually you can be more aggressive on paying for that card because it sells well. Commander players, that's just kind of your go-to blue finisher. Rhystic Study, Smothering Tithe. Smothering Tithe actually, I think, is the most valuable card in Ravnica Allegiance at this point. It's actually more expensive than the Shocklands themselves. And it's such a popular white card in Commander that it really drives the price. And without reprint yet, there's no reprint for this card. It's steadily been creeping up in price. If you look at the MTG Stocks data on this, it's actually been steadily going up in price. Some other cards we can look at, just kind of as a data points, I just picked 4 random cards here. These cards I know are kind of better. We talked about Cyclonic Rift, we talked about Smothering Tithe already, but if we pull up one card here, Sword of Fire and Ice. This card kind of blurs the line because this is also a competitive card as well. We usually see this card in Legacy in Stoneblade based decks. But at its core, I kind of do consider this a more EDH-centric card. Looking at the chart itself, this chart goes, this price chart, it goes back to 2013. Basically steady in price. Even with the reprint of Modern Masters, the very first Modern Masters, the first reprint for Sword of Fire and Ice, it hasn't really changed in price at all. It actually has, the Darksteel version has actually steadily gone up in price. There was a spike for it last year, but even now, even though it's kind of cooled off, especially with the printing in Double Masters, which has put some downward pressure on the price right now, we're still looking at $60-ish for the Darksteel version, which is actually higher than it's ever been prior to its spike. So it spiked up in probably, the spike looks like September 2nd, 2019, so about a year ago. We're actually still looking at the price that's higher than it's ever been prior to that spike in 2019. And this is for a card that got reprinted 2 months ago. If we look at the Double Masters printing, there's not a lot of data on it. It's basically stayed steady. It's basically been about $40. It hasn't really gone up or down, mainly because it's so new. If we look at the Modern Masters version, same thing. It has basically the exact same price trend as the Darksteel version. It's basically steadily climbed up in price. It had a spike and it's cooled off, but the price it's at now, kind of the $50, $55 range, is still higher than where it was pre-2019 spike. So these types of cards, again, really propped up by EDH, relatively insulated from major changes in price. It's unlikely that you would want to stock up on a bunch of them because they do sell, and they sell at a very fixed price, but it's unlikely going to go upwards dramatically anytime in the near future. It is just something to consider, though. The foil Masterpiece, same thing. It's been relatively steady in price, hasn't really gone up or down in either direction. I think part of that is because there's so many foils. There's a Judge foil of the Darksteel art. There's so many variants that I think there's some pressure on the Masterpiece version. That's probably why we haven't seen as much price increase relative to how cool and different it is. Again, just because there's extra versions, right? I think it is it's a box topper as well, right? It has a Judge promo. You have the original Darksteel version. You have the original Modern Masters version with that art, right? There's a lot of different pieces, so I think foils are kind of tough. That being said, foils are very, very good for Commander because a lot of people, they like to foil out their deck. We do see a huge price discrepancy in the Commander foils because people really like them, especially some of them that are hard to find. If you look at foils nowadays, if we open up standard, if we look at, for example, just Omnath, Locus of Creation, right, kind of the top mythic from Zendikar Rising. Cheapest copies on non-foils, probably I'm looking to pay about $18 or so. If I click on foils, you can actually find foils kind of that same price range, not that much more. The cheapest foil is $19.99, $20, $20.29, right? That's maybe a 10% difference for some of these cards. But when you look at EDH foil, again, I'm trying to find fairly extreme examples. Not every example is going to be this extreme. If I look at Cyclonic Rift, right, kind of your go-to blue card, good blue finisher we talked about. If I click on Return Ravnica, this was the original printing. You can see that the normal card is, let's see. You buy this card probably about $16, $17 or so. The foil, the cheapest copy on the foil is $35. It's more than double the price of the non-foil version. And this is something that's pretty rare to see nowadays. We know that foils have gone down quite a bit in value. They've depreciated pretty heavily. Now we don't see a large spread between non-foils and foils. But for Commander, entirely different ball game. With Commander, foils will have a large price difference, especially on some of the older foils that are much harder to find. Again, people like to foil out their deck. And if you have a hard time getting rid of foils, being able to maybe have foils available for your Commander player base, for those Commander players, may be a decent avenue for you to get rid of foils. And those are really kind of the big moneymakers in EDH. For the most part, because there's an upper limit to how quickly Wizards can reprint cards, most of these EDH cards, you work on very fixed margins. If you buy them, they will always sell, especially some of the better staples. EDH Rec is a good tool for that. You can kind of take a look at cards that you can always buy that will always sell well. For most of the store owners out there, we probably adjust our prices. There are probably cards that we pay higher on based on how in demand it is. That super hot standard card, kind of the top tier EDH card, we usually pay better. You have cards that kind of are hard to sell, slower movers. We have plenty in stock because it doesn't sell as well. We probably pay a little bit less on. Being able to identify, again, EDH Rec, great tool for this, being able to identify what those top tier EDH cards are that will do well. Again, very, very quick sellers. They'll do well for your business. Again, some of them, it's a little bit tougher to say what's a good investment, what's good to speculate on, what's good to buy long term, because most of the growth in EDH is steady. A lot of the growth that happens over a period of time as opposed to spiking very rapidly overnight. Cyclonic Rift, even though it is going to continue to be probably one of the best blue finishers out there, we're not going to be in a case where Cyclonic Rift is going to jump up dramatically in price in a short period of time. But as people continue to buy it for their blue decks for EDH, we'll see the price slowly increase incrementally as the cheap copies sell and stores have a hard time stocking them because they're so popular. Again, this card, based on EDH Rec, goes in the majority of blue decks. So it's something that you will likely always sell faster than you can buy. And those types of cards, again, if you're in for a long-term hold, I think buying a card like Cyclonic Rift would make sense. If you want to buy it now and just forget about it and just take a look at it again in maybe a year or so, you'll probably see an appreciable gain because it's unlikely that card will be reprinted again in the immediate future. So one last thing here before we kind of wrap this up. I just kind of want to give an idea of what an EDH-centric product looks like. This isn't going to work, but in front of me, I do have a box of Japanese VIP Masters. This is in Japanese, so kind of a different animal, but I think this is kind of an example of Wizards really understanding what type of product they want to sell to their player base. VIP, it's kind of different, again, because you have cards that are... because everything in here is foil, you can only get foil box toppers in here. I would say that this is a type of product that, again, really does appeal to their EDH player base, and Wizards has a good idea of understanding what that looks like. I'm just going to open this just to kind of go through and thumb through and just pretend for a moment that as an EDH player, if I were to open this, we can pretend this is English. The cards I would get and how happy I would be, or what justification I would have for the cards inside. So this is sealed. I just broke the plastic wrap on it. Let's go and take a look. This is likely me incinerating like $150 to $200 or so, but we can just kind of take a look and see what we do here. Not a big fan of this packaging. It is a lot of air, right? There's this many cards inside. For everyone who's never opened this is just kind of a quick video. There's a lot of air. This box is completely empty. There's only this many cards. I think there's 20 cards or so. This is actually the first time I've actually opened up a VIP pack myself, so I'm kind of excited for this. You can see, I believe these top few cards are in here are commons. So common, foil common. There's a foil braid, which is kind of cool. Foil common, foil common, foil common, foil common, foil common, foil uncommon, foil uncommon Throwgreth, foil uncommon Pongify, uncommon, uncommon. I'll show these all at the end. So we're here. We're our first foil rare. This is a full Japanese Mazavith. Mazavith, again, EDH card. This really kind of does go on a lot of EDH decks. It is cool. It is just kind of a generic land, kind of helps you out in a tight situation. If you have Mazavith, it's hard for someone to attack you. They need to attack you with at least 2 creatures, obviously. So Mazavith, definitely EDH card. In need of reprint, not necessarily, but it is valuable. And again, this type of card, it will sell for EDH. And if I saw this, if I imagine I saw this English foil, there's not a lot of copies of Mazavith foils out there. The previous one, I believe, was... let's see. Let's get some of this out of the way here. Maze of Ith. Your foil options are... you have the from the Vault realms, foiling on from the Vault, not really something I care for. Not a lot of people care for that. You have the Judge promo, which is pretty pricey, and then you have Eternal Masters if you want the foil there. So there's only a few versions that have foils. So this is actually the 4th foil printing, same art as Eternal Masters, and again, I think that this is probably the most accessible version for foil that people have. So I think as a Commander player, I'd be happy to open this. I should have another foil right behind this. So. Foil Karthus, right? Full Legendary Dragon. This card, prior to them reprinting this, was a pretty expensive card. This card was also printed in Mystery Boosters. So the reprint value in this card has gone down a little bit. That's kind of the reprint equity that we talk about in the past. I'm going to pull it up on TCG Player here just to double check. Yeah, it was in Alara Reborn. It was also a Mystery Booster, and then it's in Double Masters. So the value on this has gone down quite a bit. But again, from a perspective of a Commander player, the value may not be there. But if I open this in a pack, maybe I start building a Jund Dragons deck or a Jund Sacrifice deck or some variant around this card because it's here. I opened it in my pack. Moving on, this is a box topper. Full Japanese Brainstorm. Brainstorm is on the top. Is in the top 100 cards in EDH Rec. This is something that, again, EDH people like. So this is an extended art foil. We haven't seen these before. Foil Brainstorm, if you want original Mercadian Mass foil, pretty expensive. You can get like the EMA version, the A25 version is a little bit cheaper, but this full extended art, this is a pretty cool foil. Again, I would not be unhappy open this as an EDH player. If I have a blue deck, this certainly would go inside my blue EDH deck. I have another box topper here. Wormcoil Engine. Again, Wormcoil Engine has kind of blurring the line. Like, it's not the best Commander deck. It's kind of like big. Death Touch is kind of a big deal, but the unfortunate pressure on this card is that there are multiple variants of foil versions. Right, we have the original foils, which have a bunch of copies. You have pre-release foil, which is kind of unique. You have the Masterpiece. It's a Masterpiece in Exquisite Inventions. Right, so there's a lot of pressure on this. This one is a little bit tough as a box topper, but again, not necessarily in terms of value, maybe not super great, but EDH deck, I think a fair amount of decks will still play as any colors deck. This does basically give you Death Touch twice, once when you play and then once when it dies. So it is pretty cool. Again, I would not necessarily be unhappy if I can find a slot for this. Artifacts are generally something that are fairly evergreen in EDH just because you can really slot them in any single deck. And then we have here kind of our a cycle of full art lands. The unhinged lands are in here. These aren't all of them. These ones are unhinged lands. These are very, very popular for commander players. A lot of people do like these full art unhinged lands. This is just another way to reprint them, get them in people's hands. That these are pretty cheap. Now it's easy to get them in mass, and people do like these. So there's definitely a stack here. I have a few foil ones as well. There's 2 foils in the back, and some double-sided tokens. I have actually the I'm not sure if this is Death Touch or Lifelink Worm, but that's one of the foil tokens, right? These are double-sided foil tokens. These are pretty cool. Most commander decks are token-centric. They do have ways of producing tokens, so being able to have that option is pretty cool. So these were the rares. These were box toppers: Maze of Ith, Karthus, box topper Brainstorm, box topper Wormcoil Engine. And then there's definitely some playable commons and uncommons there. Is Throne of Geth, Pongify, Abrade, and then the full art lands. So again, trying to put this in the perspective, in the mind of a commander player, this is a very reasonable product. Japanese is a little bit different. Obviously, not everyone likes Japanese cards, but for English cards, this is not bad at all, right? There's definitely kind of a wide spread of cards in here that would work in commander decks if I chose to play them. And if I saw this as a commander player, the value is reasonable depending on what price I got it. And there's actually something in here I would argue for most commander players. And this is a very, very good example of Wizards having a good idea of how to sell a product to commander players. Commander players like foils, they like extended art cards, they like flashy cards, because, again, we keep talking about this. If we revisit and understand the core philosophy of Commander is a way for people to express themselves, to be able to express themselves through their deck, allows for a lot of creative processes in their deck construction, being able to choose your commander, being able to choose the cards that go into your deck, being able to choose which versions of those cards go into your deck. That's really key to Commander. And being able to understand how Commander works, being able to understand how your customers tick, will be profitable for you in the long run. So today, that will more or less summarize what we have to talk about for Commander. I plan on having some guests on that do know much more about Commander than I do. Because I don't play Commander myself, I do have an upper limit to how much I know about Commander. I just know which cards sell well, which cards have done well with Commander crowds in the past. But again, I do plan on having some guests on that will go, a little bit more into it. As always, thank you all for listening. You can find me on Twitter at Edwin13. You can find the social media sites for Vermilion on the right. Wherever you are in the world, stay safe, have a good weekend, and we will see you back here next week on Monday. Thanks again for listening.